Okay, we're going to get started on the What's New session. To introduce myself, my name is Dominic Meglio. I'm the Development Manager at Right Reason Technologies. We also have Bob Hagan here, who's our Senior Educational Administrator, and Emily Dean, our Director of Curriculum and Student Achievement. We're going to be talking a little bit about what we've been doing this year and what we're going to be doing next year. At the outset of the 2011-12 school year, we had 6 main platforms. We started in e-learning. We had branched out into benchmarking and data, and there were some kind of side projects that went along with that very nicely to round this out as a full instructional platform. Intervention lessons, our curriculum planner, which provides standards information, big ideas, essential questions, and understanding by design model. And our student center, which is very much student practice for them to take questions at home, assign them themselves, parents assigning, that type of work. And this has been great. We've had a lot of success with this system at several districts throughout New York. But we're always doing more. And that's where we move into what are we going to be doing. So we get PowerPoint. And basically, we started out the year by saying we're going to be working on small enhancements, making what we have great. It does what it does well, always room for improvement on everything we do. So we were going to try and take those existing features, add some additional functionality to them, make them a little better, and go from there. The problem was we then started having conversations. Districts are constantly faced with new challenges, new mandates from the state, and even though we were addressing a lot of problems and in fact solving a lot of these problems, there were new problems arising every day. That's where we started to take a hard look and say, okay, our plan was to take what we had, make it a little better, wasn't quite going to work for what districts needed. And that's where we go into what are we going to do now. So on that enhancement side, one thing we did was heard some great feedback on our assessment creator. I'm sure you're all familiar with what an assessment creator does. We made it a lot more user-friendly, easier to use, and added a lot more power to it. On our data center, which is our benchmarking reporting platform, which Emily's going to go into more detail on in a little bit, we realized that we had a great instructional tool. However, we weren't yet providing the reporting capabilities necessary for state reporting. Teachers and administrators especially were telling us, this is great, my teachers can use this to help students, but how does this satisfy what I need to submit to the state? Show me how I can break this up by ethnicity, by socioeconomic status. We didn't have that in this last school year. We will have that going forward. Pacing guides and profile cards, I have to mention this is an idea that came about from the contingent from Riverhead, spearheaded by Dr. Etzel. These were ideas from challenges they faced at their district, and we'll go into more detail on that, but it basically was challenges they were facing that we quickly realized other districts were facing as well. Then, of course, we move on to that 1,000-pound gorilla. Walkthroughs, SLOs, APPR, everything that every district in New York is dealing with, running out of time on, and we quickly realized we need to provide a solution because districts are looking for one. On that note, I'm going to hand it over to Emily Dean to talk a little bit about our assessment creator.
So the assessment creator was, last year was in effect. We have an assessment creator that was for grades 3 through 8 in ELA and mathematics. That assessment creator is expanding and growing all the time in its item bank selections. It's also going to include practice regions questions heading into this year toward the end of the fall. But in addition to that, we also got some great feedback from all of our users, and that's one thing our company continually tries to pride itself in. I think Bill mentioned in his presentation, Anthony alluded to it, but we're really about partnerships. We're really about listening to our users and not just saying this is our product, this is the way it works, but trying to evolve and change based on that. So we had some new additions that are coming out this year that are going to really, I think, thrill the teachers. A few of them are, now when teachers go in, if they go in the way they did last year in mathematics, it's going to be very similar. They pick the standards they'd like to assess. They can pick the number of questions they'd like to address. They can create an assessment from that. Once they get to that point, though, they have some new options. When they see their test questions, they can basically choose that they didn't like that test question, so they can pick another one from the pool. They can preview several questions from the pool to kind of see a sampling of everything that's in there to pull a specific question, or they can just have it randomly generate and pull another one from the pool. They also now have the ability just to delete a question. Before, if they created the assessment, it was a little more time consuming to go in. They could delete a question before, but they'd have to go into Contents tab. They'd have to go into Delete. they now have the ability just to delete a question right off when they've created that in that system. They also do have the ability to add any questions they would like, just like they have in the past. So everything we do in our content is completely customizable. We believe in letting teachers have the right to look at a lesson, whatever it might be, and make a change to it. So they can copy it, make a change, make it exactly what they want. We also now have the ability in the assessment creator on the reading side for teachers to go in, and instead of just picking standards at the beginning, they can actually preview passages. So if they want to hit a specific thing, maybe they've been talking about something in science, and they want to see if we have a particular passage that might be addressing that, they could actually pull that specific passage into their assessment and then preview all the questions that might be associated with that passage and select it in. So these are a couple of the features that we kind of looked at, are already a great tool, but should listen to feedback, tried to retool it and make it even better for teachers, and it's even more user-friendly now. So that's going to be something new that everyone who is a current client, when your teachers log in, this is already in there now. They'll see that. The next project that we looked at that was an existing project that we wanted to take it to the next level, as Dominic mentioned, was the data center. We really did a few things, and once again, this came from great feedback from our clients. First of all, at the administrative level, there's a lot of things you have to report on at the state level. How is my special education population doing versus their peers? How is my ESL population doing? All of our reports, we have the ability to go in and actually filter and do comparison reports. You can filter out and just look at a particular group if you wanted to. And we also came up with a new feature, which once again came from some great conversations and actually sitting with the data team on printing reports. So I'd like to jump into the data center really quickly and kind of give you a preview of some of those things. So I'm going into our data center right now, and I'm going to go in as a teacher. And Betty's going to be somebody we talk about today, so we're going to use Betty Rose as our example here. As you can see, even the layout in the data center looks a little bit different than it has in the past. Before, we used to have tabs that ran all across the top that said benchmarks, they said local assessments, and sometimes our users would get lost and they'd say, I forgot which type of report I was looking at. So now we basically have three that go across the top: report selection, the current report you're viewing, and then the recently reviewed, which is all of the reports you've looked at since you've logged in. So if you wanted to go back to something you've seen before, you can go back in there. But now, instead of listing those across the tabs, you'll notice that these run down. So whatever benchmarks or whatever type of data we're storing, you can basically see that list going down here. So we see, as my teacher here, here's all my benchmark reports under my benchmark tab. After that, I go into my state assessments and I can see that. We also do store local assessments. We store summative assessments. We store the assessments from the assessment creator. Will also be in the data center this year, which is another new great upgrade. When I'm at the teacher level of reporting, or if I was at the superintendent level and I wanted to print a report for my entire state, you'll see that there's options. Right now, since I'm at the teacher level and I'm not looking at a particular period, all of my reports that I run here would be run for my entire class. So no longer do I have to go into each period and say, okay, I'm going to pull my small group for period 1, now I want to go in and pull my small group for period 2. I can actually jump in here, and I'm going to pull up a small group plan for us right now. It also defaults to make teachers select whether they want to look at ELA and math, so that our users, our teachers, before it would always defaulted to ELA, and sometimes our math teachers would say, darn it, I want to start with math. So now they get to select. We'll go in and we'll take a peek at math here. And I'm going to click on View My Report. And now you can see we're looking at one of our very unique reports, our small group plan, which I've just now run for my entire group of classes. And I can go through and scroll all my periods and see that. If I was a district administrator logged in and I wanted to run all of my pro charts and see how all of my rank orders were for all of my grade levels, I can now do that at that level and just print. This is one of our 3 unique instructional plans that come with many of our assessments that are standards-based. This is the small group plan. It's going to show me, as a user, the standards that I have a few kids in my class that still need to work on these, and I can see those students' names listed right here. If I was looking at my whole group plan, I would see the standards that my whole class needs to work on. And if I was looking at the individual student plan, which looks very similar to that, I would see that just for a particular student, and we have all 3 of those available. One of the neat features is if I clicked right here on my standard code, I'm going to jump in here real quick. It'll take me to the curriculum planner part that Dominic mentioned, where as a teacher I can now pull my vocabulary, I can pull lessons that I might want to use with my students, I can look at the standards and examine them a little more deeply. I'm going to jump back into our data center real quick. Common Core is all in there, yep. Now, if I go back into my report selection, I could go back now and I could pull a different report and look at that if I wanted to. What I'm going to do now, though, is actually I'm going to log out as a teacher. I'm going to go back in as a district administrator. So I'm going to go all the way to the district level. And I'm going to pull up a report that we can run some demographics on. As Dominic mentioned, whatever demographic data we're taking from your student management system on our reports where it makes sense, we can now run those reports based on demographics, and we can do that in 2 different ways. So I'm going to actually run a pro chart here. And you can see I had the choice to run it for my district or to run it for all of my teachers. And now I'm here in the report. I have this report. This is what the standard report looks like. I now have a choice down here with demographics. I can actually filter this report, so I can say just show me how boys did or just show me how girls did, and it will pull that report and it will actually just pull out the proficiency chart for males or females. I can add multiple layers to that if I wanted to. So I can actually say I want to see how my special ed males did. So I can filter first by special education, then I could filter by males and do that. So I'm going to actually filter by gender real quickly. I'm going to add that to my filter, and I'm going to say I want to see female, and I'm going to click to add it. And now you can see it tells me here at the top, I'm now looking at that same pro chart, but now I'm filtered by gender female, and now I'm just seeing how my female did on that, and I can do comparisons. We can also group data, which is the other way to do it. Grouping data is going to show you the side by side. So if I wanted to group the data, I could group males and females, and I would be seeing them side by side. So you have the option either just to filter or to group. Okay. The other thing that's come out of a lot of help and feedback is, as an administrator, one of the things we heard time and time again was, if you wanted to know how a particular student was doing before, you sometimes had to know who the teacher was. You had to know what classroom they were in, maybe who their homeroom was to search. You can now go to our drill down and search directly for a student by name. You could search directly for a teacher. So instead of having to worry about, was Mrs. Smith at my school A or my school B, you can just type in her name and actually pull up her data right away. I'll just pull a student up. I was looking for Greg Clark, and once I pull Greg Clark up here, I'm now taking a peek at Greg and how he's done. And I'm really interested especially in how he's did on his state assessment, because we're starting back to the school year. So I can actually pull this open, and I'm looking at Greg's state data, and I want to see how Greg did. He's in 4th grade now, so I want to see how he did on his 3rd grade assessment, because he's been struggling. I want to look at his math and see how he did. And actually, Greg only had 1 mistake on his entire assessment, which was great, since Greg's one of my really high math students. This is our ID chart. What it will show is it will show all the standards and by priority of what that student needs. And that ID chart is available at the student level, at the classroom level, and at the district level as well. Does anybody have any questions about the data center revamp? I know that was fast, but... That's a great question. So we can get the information from the RICs. You contact the RIC and let them know that you want us to have the information, and they send us a file and we upload it from there. And we also take feeds from your student management system to keep things updated based on class size, things of that nature. And the nice thing with that, with the state data, is it not only gives you the ability to look at how your teachers come back to school in September, they can see how their class did last year, but now they'll see the roll-up and see how the kids they currently have sitting in front of them, how they did last year and what their biggest areas of deficiencies are, so we can start the school year off running. We don't have to say, okay, Greg here is in 4th grade now. I don't have to worry about reviewing 3rd grade stuff in general. I can say, here's what Greg's deficiencies were from the 3rd grade assessment. Let's start out and prioritize him with those things. Okay. That being said, we're going to jump out of the data center here for a second. Sorry. And we are going to head off into what is brand new, not just what's been retooled.
Okay, I had mentioned pacing guides had initially come about with a conversation we were having with the administrative team at Riverhead. Basically, this was, every district knows common pacing is something that needs to be addressed. It's a challenge. It's hard enough to get one building in your district to agree to common pacing, let alone your entire district, especially if you're in a district like Riverhead that has several elementary schools. It's a real challenge. One of the things that we're believers in is a proper tool can help you address those challenges. So we started to look at what exists for pacing. What are the tools that are out there to help schools create pacing guides? And there are plenty of them, but what they seemed to lack was an ability to make the process very efficient. And what I mean by that is they'll give you, okay, so you're a 4th grade teacher. What do you want to do? I'd like to work in math. Okay, great, here's a blank canvas, go. It takes a lot of time to say, I've been teaching 4th grade math for the last decade. Our district's been doing this for 100 years. We know what we're doing, but it's all on Word documents. Some of it may still be in those big binders in an office somewhere. It takes a long time to get that digital, even though we all know that's where we want to be. So what we decided to do was say, well, how do we make a tool that makes this process very efficient, especially knowing one thing. Everyone's going to Common Core. So what does that mean? In a lot of ways, starting from square one. So we already know you're going to redo a lot of your pacing. So how do we make it so, starting from scratch, you're not doing all that work by hand? And that's where this tool comes into play. First and foremost, it integrates directly with our curriculum planner. And what that means is you can say, I'm teaching 4th grade math, and it already knows all the 4th grade math Common Core standards, loads them right in. We provide you with sample big ideas, essential questions, vocabulary. All of that kind of information pulls right into that pacing guide from our system. Now you can change anything you want, but the beauty of this is you can start out with a full pacing guide very quickly. The actual screenshot we have here was one we set up for a demonstration. I built this in 20 minutes. Now, of course, there's going to be more work and refinement in the full process, but I had something that had instruction going on in a reasonable pace from September through June. What it allows you to do is add information directly from our curriculum planner. So you can choose a domain in the Common Core. And you can basically say, I want to teach this over X weeks, X days, paste it in, everything gets loaded right there. It's 3 clicks. And you basically added 1 month worth of instruction into your pacing guide. Now you just have to make your changes. We're not really teaching this one standard this week. That comes 2 weeks later. This big idea is not quite the way I would say it. A lot less work than it would have been. Point there is twofold. Number one, if you're doing nothing, as I said, binders, Word documents, whatever else you may have, it's going to be difficult to get online without something that makes this process efficient. If you're already using another product, same problem. The first question that always comes up is, well, how do I get everything into your system? This is how we make that very easy. We use our system to help load that data in a matter of minutes, what may have taken days or weeks. Does anyone have any questions on our pacing guide component? I'd be happy to go into more detail on anything.
The neat thing about the pacing guides is also teachers have the opportunities to upload any kind of resource they want to it. So Bill talked about some wonderful technology things. They can upload a website, they can upload a file that they might have saved, and these things can become common pacing. And it is a permission-based thing. So at a district level, you can decide who has the rights to write a pacing guide and then assign that pacing guide to certain classes. So if you want a common pacing guide for all of your 4th grade, you could build that common pacing and apply it to all 4th grade classes with some rule setting in our system, which will allow us to do some really neat things with reporting come October.
Absolutely. In addition to uploading resources, one of the things we're going to be having a breakout session immediately following this presentation where we talk about our intervention lessons. One of the things you can do is take lessons that are in our system and attach them to your pacing guides, or modify those lessons, create your own. But again, it's that rapid deployment. How do I get this pacing guide completed, ready to go, and then work on making it the best pacing guide possible without that initial problem of, well, who's going to start this massive task? Because we all know how that goes. It takes forever. It may take months before it even gets started. Emily mentioned the learning plans. To mention what we're going to talk about there is a big question we had on, for example, the small group plan she displayed earlier is, it's October. Took the first benchmark, and I'm seeing lots of standards on here that my students are weak in. first thing teachers say is, well, of course they're on there. I haven't taught them yet. It's October. It's a summative test. So I expect to see 30, 40 standards in October. Don't expect to see that in April, but in October I do. So how do I know what is instruction that needs to be retaught versus what are just topics I haven't gotten to yet? And that's where it can tie into the pacing guides to say, well, this is supposed to be taught in week 2. So we're in week 4. So we can color code that right on our learning plans to say, these are the topics that, based on district pacing, should have been covered. These are the topics that have not yet been covered. And that's important because you still may find standards missing that you haven't covered. It's important because if you find, especially after 2 benchmarks, standards you have not taught are mastered by all of your students, maybe something you need to spiral back in, but you don't need full instructional time on that because your students understand it. That's the power of those reports, especially when tied to pacing. Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about is profile cards. And again, this was from Riverhead. To tell the story there, when I picture what was described to me about profile cards, I'm picturing a bunch of principals sitting around a giant conference table with hundreds of pieces of paper sprawled all over the place, looking at student information. Basically, the idea was that these were physically profile cards, a piece of paper that they were using, and from conversations we know other districts are using something similar as well, to track information about students. We all know that you need somewhere to say, how are students doing longitudinally on assessments? How do they do on the state assessments, any benchmarking assessments you're doing, DIBELs, any other measure that your district is using. And when you try to get this information, you often find, well, the state data we have in a system like VARS. DIBELs, well, some of the teachers have that on sheets of paper from when they do that in the classroom. Benchmarks, there's going to be another vendor, maybe us, maybe someone else who has that information in their system. How do you pull all of this together? And what they were doing at Riverhead was, well, pen and paper. Write it down. Copy all that information out of these different systems into one central location. And I think we all understand what the challenges are with that. Aside from the inefficiency, there's a problem of inaccuracy. Real easy to write a state assessment score. Now it's screwed up for all ages until somebody eventually notices a student did better than it says, and so on. The second portion of this is where they saw it going, which is more than just that longitudinal data. When you have that longitudinal data, which we show on the grid here, what we can then say is, okay, great, I see a problem here. 23% score on this fall benchmark in 4th grade. What am I going to do about it? Even more important, when I look back, if I had a weakness last year, what did that teacher do about it? This is something that normally either doesn't happen or happens through informal conversations, which means it doesn't happen for every student. The idea here is, under this intervention section here, which launches this little window at the top, teachers can log what they're doing with their students and what worked and what didn't on a student-by-student basis. So imagine the power of that as a 4th grade teacher when a student walks into your room and you know exactly what their 3rd grade teacher did with them to help them in English and math, what worked and what didn't for that student. It means you don't have to try a lot of things that aren't going to work, especially when you start to see things, not in 4th grade, in 8th grade, where you see the same things working 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and the same things not working. It saves you a lot of time. It lets you use the best technique for educating each and every student. This is something that, right off the bat, we were able to pre-populate with a lot of information our districts were doing this past school year. In our system, we have these intervention lessons, which again, we'll be going into later, that we know teachers assign to their students. Thousands of these lessons were assigned across New York State to students. That's already in here. So now, starting at the first day of next school year, teachers can see what additional help needed to be given to the students sitting in front of them today, day 1 of school. What were their weaknesses last year? What did their teacher do to help them, and did it work? Something that teachers don't have today, and something they're going to get next year without having to do anything. It's already in the system for them. Oh, good. Absolutely. All of the information can be entered instantaneously by teachers. Every teacher has access to the system for their students. So we get information from the district about who teaches what students. Teachers can, on a day-by-day basis, go in and log what they're doing with students and update. There's a comments field off to the right here that they can keep track of. Is it working? Is it not? When did I stop that technique? When did I start the next one? So yeah, they can track that on a quarter by quarter basis, month by month, whatever makes sense to them. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Absolutely. And the other thing to keep in mind here is talking about fourth grade. So in fourth grade, it's probably the same teacher teaching English and math. Middle school may not be the case. Maybe not even at fourth grade, depending on your district. Just because you're a math teacher doesn't mean you can't see what my English teacher is doing with me. You get access to all of the information about the students. So again, it's fostering that collaboration. Jeremiah, I see you doing this great work with this student peer tutoring. How's that working out? Because your results on here are great, and I'm not doing much peer tutoring. Can you show me what you're doing so I can do that with them in math? Because in English, it's working great for you. Why wouldn't it work in math? Let's see if it does. So it's designed for that collaboration. That's exactly what we're pushing for. Okay. If there's no other questions, we'll move on.
Okay, so walkthroughs. I'll tell you a quick story. It was about 4 or 5 years ago. I was in the school district. Actually, I was working with Bill. We went through the same training. We went through months on end on walkthroughs, and basically what we did was we got 3-ring binders, and we went into classrooms, and basically what we did was we tracked all this information. And I'd go do my walkthrough, put my notes in there, put my little stickies in there, and by the end of the year, I had a binder that was like this with all these sticky papers in there, and my handwriting was awful. So trying to make sense of that at the end of the year evaluations was very difficult. Then, if I wanted to know what Bill did or some of my other colleagues did, I had to kind of go ask them or look at their binders. And I got to tell you, what really happened with the end is I took that binder, I put it on the shelf. Next year, I created another binder. I never went back. I never looked at that information. I didn't have the ability to do that. It was time-consuming, and it quite honestly got very, very heavy in March. So what we began to do was take a look at different ways of kind of collaborating, kind of bringing that all together. Well, what we did was we created on Google Forms, went in there, created a form for our walkthroughs, and it was wonderful. Now the problem was I couldn't get everybody to get a Gmail account. Who had Opt Online, who had Yahoo, who had AOL, who didn't want more than 1 or 2 emails, who in the district wasn't able to get on their personal email because the district had locked it down for whatever reason, what we were talking about before. So these are the obstacles that were coming up time and time again. So when I came on board at Right Reason Technologies and the walkthrough idea came up, it was perfect. It was seamless. It didn't rely on having an outside email account. It was already embedded into everything else that we were doing. So what we did was we realized that when we created the walkthrough platform, one of the things that we wanted to be able to do was make sure that multiple administrators were able to view the reports, make sure that we could see it horizontally, but most importantly, we could see it longitudinally, so that we can track this information over time. So therefore, if I'm thinking of it in this kind of way, I'm thinking of Rob and I'm thinking of Mike, who could potentially go and see 60 to 80 teachers and could wind up seeing 2-3 times each of those teachers during their walkthroughs, plus they have their directors or their assistant principals, so they need to be able to look at all that information, clean, easy, one sheet, so we can see it across the board. And what we did with our walkthrough platform is exactly that. We're able to go and utilize the NICET rubric, the Danielson 2007, and also the Marshall rubric. We have all 3 in our system. We have the capability of doing it, so whatever rubric you're using, we can do that. The beauty of the whole situation is that we're able to track and keep track of all the artifacts. So and I'll do this later, I have 2 breakout sessions, and you'll get the opportunity to critique me, which will be a lot of fun. And basically what you're able to do there is look at it from a district perspective, look at it from a department perspective, or a grade level. Really, it's flexible. It's really how you want to see it. And that becomes very helpful, particularly when you have to start writing up those end-of-the-year evaluations. And you want to take a look at the information at hand, so that when you put in that rating, it's as accurate as possible. Okay.
You get a hands-on chance to view it right after this at a breakout session if you want to try out the walkthrough. So the big thing on everybody's mind right now is SLOs and what we're doing to approach that. And so what I'm going to do is actually walk you through the process of what we can do right now to help automate. I think, Anthony, we were talking about efficiency and time and compliance. I know Lois brought it up as a concern of how do I balance that. So what we've tried to do is create a system that's going to make it a lot easier for the administrators and for the teachers to deal with all of this, what's going on with SLOs and APPR. So I'm actually going to log out of the system very quickly. And I'm going to log in from a teacher perspective, and we're just going to walk through this process very quickly on what this might look like. Because the real nightmare is going to be with all of this, and aside the testing and coming up with what the test is going to look like and all that, but also how are we going to manage all of these forms? How are we going to collect these? How are we going to make sure that they've been approved? Who's going to be in charge of which teachers? And all of that is something that's been thought through for the system. So I'm going to log in right now as Betty Rose, and you'll remember Betty from our data earlier. And I'm going to go to her APPR tab here, and Betty is ready to submit her goal form. And she's going to go in, and we're going to make her a new goal form. And you can see Betty has not been super efficient at this earlier, but she might do a better job today, so we'll see. And I'm basically going to click to add it. And now I can open up my new form here. And Betty gets to choose her school, and this can be auto-populated based on your student enrollment data, but she happens to teach at 2 different schools, so I'm going to select the school she's submitting this for. And I can now go through the process of all of the information that has to be on that SLO form as Betty, and you can notice this is going to be a rich text, so she can do bolding, she can do anything she could do in Word here. And I'm just going to start out writing a little bit about my population. So I'm a 4th grade teacher, so this form is going to be regarding my math students. So this is my 4th grade math class. And I'm not going to fill out too much more there. But you can see I can now go through, and Betty's going to choose the student she wants to include on her form. So I'm going to actually, she has 2 classes here, a 4th grade class and a 3rd grade class, but this is her 4th grade. So she's going to select that there. She's also going to select her exam, and she's actually going to be using the fall benchmark for math, so she's going to select that here. And she's also going to set, her goal is going to be, and right now we have this set for SI, but that can be customized to meet your district's needs. So we're using our success index, which is how much a student has grown versus how much they potentially could grow, which is one of our many reports. And for those of you that haven't seen them before, I'd be happy to show them to you anytime today. And she's basically going to add those students from that class. And now that I've done that, I can scroll down here and I can see that these are the students that are added, and it actually tells me what percentage of my students are now covered by this SLO, and I have to get past that 50%, so that actually works out well, because that's my 1 4th grade math class, and that's what I'm assessing here. I can now go in and I can talk about the learning content, so I'm going to give a description over this assessment. I'm not going to take the time to do that right now, but I could go through here and tell a little bit about this assessment, what it's covering. I can then go through and attach the standards that this assessment is covering through our tree here, so I can open it up, I can attach the Common Core standards that it might be assessing, and I'm going to go through, I'm going to skip this for the sake of time right now, but I could go through there. I can talk about the interval of instruction time, knowing that some of our high schools, it may be a semester as opposed to a year-long course, so we can talk about that. They can attach evidence here. Once again, rich text here, they can upload things, they can add images, they can add a graph, they can add anything they would like for their evidence here. And then I can talk a little bit about the baseline, my targets, and I can actually pre-program, and once again, this can be pre-programmed. So if all of your 4th grade is using the same heady criteria, this could be pre-populated, but if it's not, if it's going to be something that might be different from class to class, they can actually go in here and set their heady criteria. So starting with that effective teacher, I'm looking at a 65%, and I can build that in either direction. And then I can give my rationale here. And once I've completed this form, which I haven't, but we're going to pretend I have, I can save it and submit. And it's going to ask me, are you sure you want to submit this form? And I'm going to say, yes, I do. So now I've submitted that on the teacher side. So what happens on the other side? I'm going to log out here as Betty. I'm going to log back in as Betty's supervisor. And I'm going to go to APPR SLO, and I'm going to go to goal search form because I'm looking for Betty's. I know Betty has turned hers in. And I can see that Betty has submitted a new SLO form. So I can open that up right now. and I can take a peek at her form. I can review it. I'm looking at it. I see she has a number of kids, but there's a whole lot in here Betty hasn't filled out yet. So I'm not going to approve this at this time. So I'm going to submit a review. Betty didn't do much better than she has in the past, unfortunately. And I can make any comments I want here. So I can say, this form still needs Hetty, your targets, and I'm just going to say et cetera. You probably wouldn't say that, but we'll just say et cetera. And then I can click this more information needed. What this is going to do is it's going to send a message back to Betty and let her know that her form has not been approved, and it will give her the specific feedback that I have typed in here for this. And all of this is managed in the tool. You also have the ability, if you have multiple administrators, to decide who is going to be in charge of which teachers for it. So you might have a principal and assistant principal, and they're going to divide up, or they get to pick who's going to be associating who. That's part of their step process where they can go in and they select the people that they're going to be in charge of. And you can view reports at the administrator level, the superintendent level. You can get a listing of who's been approved, who hasn't filled theirs out yet, and you can see exactly where all of this is in our reporting system. So all of that is something that's in there right now. In addition, with our APPR solution, we have some pieces. As the state is changing things, we're working on them as well. Some pieces that are going to be coming out for you this year will be the formal evaluation piece, so the ability to actually do the formal inside the system, which will be very similar to the walkthrough, only it'll be that more end-of-year summative tool in there. We'll also have heady sheets that will be auto-populated based on what you're storing with us. So you can see this adds up to 120, and some people off the bat might be saying, Emily, that's supposed to add up to 100, but you know a teacher's either going to be an SLO teacher or they're going to have those state assessment points. Because we're storing state assessments and because you can store your SLOs with us, we'll auto-populate all that, and then based on your rubric and your criteria, you'll have this here, and you can see where a teacher's ranking is, and you can see we're looking right now at Peter Schmidt, and Peter is actually a pretty good teacher. His rating is overall effective, and I can see his point total on each one of these. And that is something that can be adjusted. So all of that is a customizable solution that's coming, and the heady sheets and the formal evaluation will be coming as this year as you need them. Yes, question?
Is this going to have the capability for teachers to have multiple SLOs?
To fill out multiple SLOs to be approved?
To figure out the heading region based on the numbers.
Right, so for each of their forms, they can go and adjust their heading. And once again, if you have like a common one that's going to be true for like all of your fourth grade, then we can just pre-populate that. But otherwise, you can have the teachers can actually go in and fill that out and submit it, and then the administrator can review it and say, no, this isn't quite what we agreed, or take it back.
No, I mean that it's primarily secondary.
Okay.
If you have multiples and you have to do math, then what percentage of the
Oh, the 20.
Yeah, is that doable, or is that something you have to do outside?
That is.
Yes, that
Yes.
separate SLOs and separate headies.
And it will do the ratio.
Right.
To figure 0.2 or 0.8 or whatever. The last piece that's coming this year that'll be into it, and this kind of goes along with the heady sheet, but it's also taking it to that very next level, which is we saw the student profile card, which is already available. We're having great conversations. People were looking at the student profile card and they said, this is fantastic. How do we get a teacher profile card? And so this is our next level. You can see it's going to be able to store all that data for a teacher that was on the heady sheet. All the assessment data is going to go in there. But they can also upload artifacts on there. You could upload a plan that might be on there for teachers if you need to. They can upload, their attendance can be in there, activities that they've done, if activities are part of their point total. Any of that can be uploaded here, and it becomes very much what we look like for the student, only for the teacher side. So you can see we've had a busy year. We have a fantastic tech team that's done some great work on all of this. But really the main thing we wanted to do is just give you a little preview. If there's any more information anybody needs about any of these pieces, feel free to stop one of us today. We do have a computer set up outside. We'd be happy to walk you through anything else. But I think otherwise at this time, it's time for the breakout sessions. We are moving lunch to 12:30, so don't think you're not eating. You are eating. Lunches are going to be at 12:30. We're going to do our first breakout before. So right now you have the option, walkthroughs will be taking place in here, and we'll do another breakout. So the same 3 things will be offered after lunch, so you can choose when you want to do it. Walkthroughs will be in here. Downstairs we have blended learning classroom, that will be available for you to do, and also the RTI process and intervention lessons. So you can go see the 2 classrooms at work or stay up here for walkthroughs. And we'll get started and then go to lunch at 12:30.